Hello, historians. Welcome to Wordless Wednesday. Here is your bell ringer for Wednesday, September 11th. You are doodling, so draw your answer to the question, what does republicanism mean? Also in class today, we read an article called titled Neither Equal Nor Free. It's a play, and so when you read it, the goal was to figure out how to write a summary in 17 words or less. All right, the notes today are Notes 3, the Constitution, Unit 1, the Constitution, Notes 3, Issues and Resolutions. Remember that when you see the pencil and you see red font, your job is to fill in the blanks on your note-taking packet. Okay, ready? Here we go. The first issue that came up as heated debate at the Constitutional Convention was the issue of representation. When the convention was underway, it was decided that the government would be split into 3 branches. The branch of the government that made the laws would be made up of representatives from each state. So this first dividing issue was how many representatives each state should send to the law-making branch of the government. Big states with a lot of citizens felt they should send representatives based on how many people lived in that state, but smaller states worried that the bigger states would overpower the smaller states and wanted all states to send the same number of representatives to government. After much debate, a resolution was decided to take that legislative branch and split it into 2. Don't forget to grab your pencil and start filling in your notes. The 2 houses in Congress would become known as the House of Representatives, where states would send representatives based on their population, so that the more people you have, the more representatives you have in Congress. The Senate was the opposite. This was the idea of the smaller states with less population. The Senate is where each state would send 2 people for equal representation. And then for the laws to pass, it would have to go through both the House of Representatives and the Senate. If a law didn't go through both, it would not become law. The second issue is the issue of slavery. In terms of counting the population to figure out how many representatives to send to our Congress, the southern states felt that they needed to count their slaves, because in those southern states, enslaved Africans made up a large part of the population. If they couldn't count their slaves, the southern states worried that the northern states would get to send more representatives to Congress. The northern states, though, said, you know what? If you don't recognize slaves as people, you recognize them mostly as property, then they should not count in your population if they don't get the same rights as everybody else. So the resolution was decided, and after much debate and argument over the issue of slavery, the 3/5 compromise determined that a slave would count as 3/5 of a person towards a state's population. So that way, the southern states kind of got what they wanted to count their slaves, at least partially, and the northern states kind of got what they wanted, where the slaves didn't count fully into the overall population of those southern states. The issue of slavery was a difficult one at the Constitutional Convention because many of the northern delegates wanted to completely outlaw it and get rid of it. But the southern states' economies were tied to slavery, and they were unwilling to get rid of slavery. In fact, many of them said, if we get rid of slavery in this new United States, then we are out. We will not be a part of it. And so what the agreement was when they finally wrote the Constitution was to basically ignore the issue of slavery for 20 years. So Congress couldn't make any laws or about slavery or the slave trade for 20 years. Thus, ignoring and sort of brushing under the rug this issue of slavery until later. The third and last issue of at the Constitutional Convention was the issue of electing the president. How should they elect the president? Some delegates wanted the executive branch to be made up of 3 people. Some wanted it to be one powerful person chosen by members of Congress. And that is the group that thought average citizens aren't educated enough to wisely choose a president. And this is different than the outlook here in the United States in 2019. The truth is, in 1790, there were very few educated people. Most Americans were farmers and often didn't go to school at all, and if they did, it would only be through 5th or 6th grade. So the concern was that the Americans of the time weren't educated enough. On the flip side, there were those delegates who thought, well, if the Congress chooses the president, so the representatives from each state get to choose the executive, then the executive will only do what Congress wants to, as kind of a return of the favor, so to speak. So the resolution became that the president would be elected through an electoral college. Each state would send electors, or voters is another way to look at it, to an electoral college. So that would be in the capital city. It's not an actual university, but it is during an election time. They would be the people to vote for their state. But those electors, they would give the vote that they had to the candidate who won the popular vote in their state. And the popular vote is just majority rules, so the person that received the most votes. Since then, some changes have taken place to change the election process, like the requirement of school through 12th grade, more ways for citizens to get information, and citizens just in general knowing more about issues and the candidates. Okay, let's wrap this up by flipping your packet back to the timeline. The timeline is located on Notes 2. So the delegates, they spent the summer of 1787 debating all of these aspects, and on September 17th, they declared the Constitution complete, even though some of them, like Benjamin Franklin, didn't entirely approve of all of its parts, especially the issue of slavery. But they could agree that it was the best that they could do at the time, and they needed to give it a try. So a signed draft was sent to be published all over the states, and the delegates returned to their states to begin the debate of whether their state wanted to approve or ratify the Constitution. In 1788, nine of the 13 states ratified the Constitution, which is what the delegates agreed to in terms of making it the law of the land. And then in 1789, so just a year later, we held our first election for president, and George Washington was elected the first president of the United States. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.